Hi, I'm Caden here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL Week 4 recap for the 2024 season. Before we jump into some of those games, just two tidbits of news quick. First and foremost, the Buffalo Bills edge rusher Von Miller has been suspended for 4 games due to violating the NFL personal conduct policy. So you will not be seeing him for the next quarter of the season. And you will not be seeing Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice for the rest of the season. He will be out. Wait, he is out for the season, correct?
Yeah, there's been some discrepancy about how torn the ACL is, but the fact of the matter is that it's torn.
When you have a torn ACL, you're out for the season. I just realized about halfway through it that I hadn't seen any official confirmations, but I did see it was a torn ACL.
Yeah,
exactly. Especially playing a position like receiver, that's not something you just jump back from at halfway through the season. So yes, Rashee Rice, the Chiefs wide receiver, will miss the rest of the season with a torn ACL.
And it might be a while before we see him because he'll be suspended by next season for his.
That is true. He still has a suspension coming around. The wheel is still spinning for the NFL suspension wheel.
Yeah, for his crime from this past summer, because it takes the NFL a year and a half for that wheel to stop spinning.
Yep, just like it did with Von Miller. He is just now seeing his suspension from some stuff that happened in
it was a 2023 incident.
Yeah, so who knows when Rashee Rice will get a suspension, but nonetheless, it'll be after a season-ending injury now, sadly for him and the Chiefs. But now to move on to our favorite games from Week 4. Of course, we usually do our Packers game, Vikings game, and last year's game of the week before we do our game of the weeks that we pick. But this week, those first 3 things are all the same game since the Packers and Vikings face each other, and it was our game of the week last week. So switching it up a little bit here, we are first going to do the 2 game of the weeks that Cal and I each picked, and then finish off by talking about the Vikings-Packers game. So rolling straight into that, we're going to start with Callan's pick for game of the week, and the second of 2 Monday Night Football games. We have the Seattle Seahawks heading over to Detroit to take on the Lions, and the Lions pick up a win at home by a score of 42-29.
Yeah, and this really was a good win for the Detroit Lions. And they were ahead for most of the game, even though Seattle kept it close. And then they kind of pulled away at the end. But this was a actual perfect game for Jared Goff, who went 18 for 18, 3 total touchdowns, including a receiving touchdown, and nearly 300 yards. So he had a perfect passer rating, perfect catch percentage. So that's always good to have as a quarterback. And it was really another good game by the Detroit Lions running backs, who also combined for 3 touchdowns between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. So this really was strong performances by the Detroit Lions offense, who was on fire for the whole night and never really did slow down at all, except for maybe a couple of drives that stalled out. But in the end, the Lions were just way too much for the Seahawks, and the Seahawks tried to come back, but Geno Smith just couldn't find the end zone when it really mattered late in the fourth quarter.
No, this game was absolutely insane to watch because it was pure blowout from the start for Detroit. And in the middle of the game, all of a sudden, Kenneth Walker was like, hey, guess what, guys? I'm not hurt anymore. And he just absolutely erupted for 3 touchdowns out of nowhere to totally get the Seahawks back in the game. But then the Lions ended up just finishing it as the blowout that it started as, pulling away again and really just kind of controlling that game in that fourth quarter, even though they're actually outscored in that fourth quarter. But they were obviously in control from the start of the fourth quarter on. So yeah, this was a really good game to watch overall. Lots of big numbers if you're a fantasy football fan. Like I just said, Kenneth Walker with 3 touchdowns. Like Callan said, Jahmyr Gibbs had 2 touchdowns. Jared Goff had 3 combined touchdowns, including a receiving touchdown from Amon-Ra St. Brown. So just anything you wanted in a game, you kind of got it in this one. You got a little bit of trick plays sprinkled in. You got some close games sprinkled in. You got some blowouts sprinkled in. It was a hell of a one to watch. Probably one of the better Monday Night Football games so far, even though the score wasn't overly close. But the kind of the big thing in this one is for the first time this season, we saw the new analytic play backfire for a team. The Seattle Seahawks scored a touchdown that would have only put them down by one possession if they would have just taken their extra point. But instead, when it was 20-28, they went for two and played the analytical play of you're down by 14, you go for a 2-point conversion, then either you don't get it and you can go for it again to tie, or you get it and then you can take the lead with a touchdown, which I actually do agree with. I usually don't overly agree with the analytical plays, but this is one of the few that I really do agree with and really like. But in this case scenario, it kind of blew up in the Seahawks' face because they had total momentum and then they went for two, didn't get it, got a flag, got another opportunity from the 1 yard line, and didn't get it again.
Mhm.
And I feel like from that moment on, they just kind of lost all momentum. It almost seemed like it deflated them because right after that happened, Jared Goff threw that 70-yard touchdown to not Jahmyr Gibbs, but rather Jameson Williams on the first play of their drive. And then from there on out, the Lions just controlled the game. Seahawks kind of made it look closer than it was a couple of times, but I think overall this one was much more decidedly towards the Lions than the score shows. So now moving on to the game I picked for Game of the Week, we have a AFC matchup with the Pittsburgh Steelers heading to Indianapolis to take on the Colts. And the Colts pick up a home upset win by a score of 27-24. And of course, why I picked this game as the Game of the Week is the return of Joe Flacco. Early in the game, Anthony Richardson had a rushing play, which at the end he got hurt on. He obviously had a hurt hip. Went out for a couple of plays. Joe Flacco came in for a couple of plays. But then Anthony Richardson came back in. And it was like, okay, he must be okay. You know, he's young, he's tough. And then they decided to run a QB draw off of his injury, which was very interesting to me.
I didn't realize that.
Anthony Richardson, literally before he even got tackled, dropped to the ground and just obviously wasn't going to come back in after that because you could see from the second he accelerated, it just wasn't fully healed yet. So that was, I'm not going to sit here and ripe on that too much, but that was just a very interesting play to say the least. But hey, it worked out in the end because then Joe Flacco proceeded to come in and lead multiple touchdown drives, lead multiple game-ending drives, not game-winning drives by any means, but game-ending drives to eat some clock up, get those first downs that they needed, and not allow the Steelers to get back in the game. So it was just so fun to see and so hilarious that Joe Flacco did that. I would love to see Joe Flacco just become some couch hero quarterback and like for 2 or 3 more years, even after these prior 2 years, what he's doing with the Cleveland Browns or what he did with the Browns and what he could possibly be doing with the Colts. If he just keeps doing this for different teams every year, it'd be like NFL legend stuff. It would put him in the Hall of Fame in my eyes. It would be so freaking funny. But we'll see if that even actually happens this year with the Colts. But nonetheless, in this game, he comes in, he remembers back to his Baltimore days, and he said, wait, I know how to beat Mike Tomlin, and he shows him how to do it and gives the Steelers their first loss of the season.
Yeah, and it really was mostly on Joe Flacco because the Anthony Richards injury happened, I believe, late in the first quarter, maybe early second. So this was Flacco's game for most of it, and he really did lead the Colts into victory over the previously undefeated Steelers. And it was a good game by the Colts rushing attack, who the Jonathan Taylor went over 60 yards and a touchdown, and then actually had a mild high ankle sprain, so he is questionable for next week. So that'll be interesting to see if he plays or not next week. But as far as this week goes, this was really on the Colts defense, which was able to shut down Justin Fields and cause him to have one of the biggest bumbles of the season so far with a fumble on a scramble that really changed momentum from the Steelers to the Colts late in the game. And other than that, I think the score is closer than the game really was because I think the Colts had it for most of this game because of Joe Flacco.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think that the Steelers will be too affected by this. I think they come out next week and they still continue to play just fine. They got a tough matchup on a primetime game next week. But nonetheless, it was a really good game by Joe Flacco and the Colts in general to be able to take a hit like losing your starting quarterback and still play the whole game and play to a win. So now, of course, the big moment of this episode, all of our game of the week of last week and the 2 Packer-Vikings game we always talk about, all wrapped up right here with the Minnesota Vikings heading to Lambeau to take on the Green Bay Packers and picking up a road win by a score of 31-29 and staying undefeated. Now, from the start, this game looked like it was over. It was 21-0. It was 28-7 at the end of the first half. The Vikings had absolutely ran away with it. And then there was a scoreless third quarter, so it looked like nothing was really going to happen. And then all of a sudden, Jordan Love was like, just like Kenneth Walker did. He said, "Hey guys, I'm not injured anymore. The rust is off. Here I am." Jordan Love just absolutely erupted towards the end of the game. And more than anything, Jordan Love embodied Brett Favre more than I have ever seen him do before. A lot of people make that comparison. I saw it a lot last year. But in this game, I don't think I have ever seen it more than now. The way that in back-to-back drives, he lofted one of the most confusing, worst picks I've seen this season into Byron Murphy like it was a gift falling from the sky for Byron Murphy. On first down, he was getting blitzed, but it wasn't even like a ton of pressure. He could have probably gotten out of the pressure.
Take the sack.
Take the sack. Take your points, whatever. But then on the next drive, after a Vikings turnover, he proceeded to have one of the prettiest throws I've seen of the season when he absolutely frozen roped one between the safety and corner into Dontavian Wicks in the back of the end zone from like 20, 30 yards out. It was a beautiful throw, to say the least, and it put him within a score of 29-31, which ended up being the final. But it just when I see stuff like that, I hate it because it's not my quarterback, but I also love it because it's just so funny because Favre has been one of my favorite players ever. So I don't want Love to beat other Favre because that means a lot of him beating the Vikings in the future. But nonetheless, I do love to see it. But jumping over to the Vikings side of things on this one, I thought that they played really well. Of course, they had that collapse in the second half, only putting up 3 points. But when you have that good of a first half like they did and absolutely dominate, you can have a little bit of a collapse in the second half and still get away with a win, just like they proved that they could. So if you can just start games that hot like that, I mean, it just makes me so confident for the season because it's something I've never seen from the Vikings before. Pretty much the entire time I've been watching the Vikings, they've been almost the dead opposite. A lot of the times they start a game very slow, very loose, very sloppy, to say the least. And then they are able to come out from halftime and look really good and get the stuff done that they need to get done. And sometimes it resulted in a win, sometimes it didn't. But now they've been playing the opposite side of the coin. And every game this year, they started off really hot and then had a little bit less of a second quarter. This one much less than other second halves of this year. But nonetheless, have still been able to keep the win because of how well they played in the first quarter, or first half rather. So if we can keep that train going, if we can keep the trend moving, I'm more than fine with it. I'd like to not only put up 3 points in the second half again this season, I'd like to put up some more points in the second half. But hey, man, like I said last week, I'm just acting like the success isn't even happening because I'm afraid I'm going to scare it away. So a win's a win. 4-0. It's so weird to say, but on to next week. And on to more stress in London for the Vikings.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later because it's an old nemesis, Aaron Rodgers, showing up. But we'll talk about that next time. This is about the Packer-Viking game. And boy, did we deserve to lose, but we should have won.
Literally.
We should have made that comeback happen. We missed 2 field goals early in the first half. 2 really makeable field goals, a 47 and a 38-yarder, and both of them were wide right. And that's just, you can't be having that happen because that was the difference right there. We have this huge 22-point outburst in the fourth quarter and can't cap it off because we weren't able to make 2 field goals opportunities convert early in the first half. And it's just funny how that all comes full circle when you don't think that really matters at the time because it's 3 points. And we talk about how 3 points and field goals don't win you games, but they sure can lose you games. So that's one thing to remember about field goals is that Even though they don't put teams away, they sure can lose you games. But really, this was hats off to the Vikings and that defense. They really were able to get to Jordan Love, and though they didn't have a ton of sacks, they had a lot of pressure and a lot of hits on him. And really, he got beat up there a couple of times early in the game, but he was really able to shake off that rust and come back to a 4-touchdown, 3-interception game with almost 400 yards passing. And it's the first Packers quarterback to have a game like that since Brett Favre
Shocker.
in 1999.
Yeah.
The last 4-touchdown, 3-interception game, which means we've went almost 2 decades between a 3-interception game. That's just how often it happened with Rodgers. So this is going to be a different kind of roller coaster with Jordan Love, because he's going to have those interceptions, but he's going to come back and have those touchdowns. And boy, did he almost bring us back.
God, 22 points in the fourth quarter is just insane to think about. But actually, while you were talking about the field goals, it made me remember a point that I wanted to talk about, that I wanted to point out. And that is our field goal in the second half, the only points we had in the whole game, and just how cool it was to see that drive from Sam Darnold. Because this drive was so clutch. It only resulted in 3 points, not a touchdown. But that doesn't change at all how clutch it was. The Packers had all the momentum of the world. They had just come off of, within like a 5-minute span, Packer touchdown, Viking turnover by Sam Darnold, a strip sack, and another Packer touchdown. And then Sam Darnold gets the ball at the 25, methodically drives the Vikings down the field and can't close out the drive, but he gets them in field goal range. Will Reichert puts the field goal through, and it ended up being technically the field goal that won the game for us, considering we only won by 2 points. So just with the sheer momentum that was in the Packers' side at that point in Lambeau, all that noise, all that pressure, being able to drive down the field the way he did, eat some clock up, and get 3 points on the board when you absolutely needed it was so cool to see. And it's just another reason that shows that it's really been clicking for Sam Darnold lately, and more than anything, really been clicking between Sam Darnold and Kevin O'Connell at head coach. So that was just so awesome to see. So I'm happy you brought up the good old field goals to make me remember.
Is it fair to say that Sam Darnold is an early MVP candidate?
I think it's more than fair to say.
I can't believe it.
I mean, it ties right in with the fact that I don't want to acknowledge the success because I'm scared of it. But if it wasn't for that fact that I'm afraid of the success, I would say he's 100% the MVP frontrunner. But I don't think it's crazy at all to say he's at the very least an early MVP candidate. Certainly.
Definitely. The way he's been playing.
It's been, man.
Except for this game, he turned the ball over a couple times. And one was on a big strip sack. And one was on a questionable interception.
The interception was questionable, but the strip sack was not his fault. He got lit up.
He did.
He got absolutely smoked.
He got hit from the blind side.
So I don't blame him on that one. That's just like hey, what do you do? But overall, yeah, hell of a game in this one. It was the tale of two halves, to say the least.
Definitely.
But more the tale of one quarter for you guys.
One quarter, and yeah, I guess because you got 14 in both the first and the second.
Yeah, it was a crazy game, and definitely one for the books, and a great way to start this matchup this season. Can't wait for it to come again later in the year. But thank you all so much for watching this episode. Make sure you stay tuned in until tomorrow when we have our NFL Week 5 predictions. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.